Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, verse chapter 30, verse number 24. Yojananam sahasrani navatim navachadvanaha tribir muhurtai dvapyam va nita prapnoti yatana. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Thus he has to pass 99,000 yojanas within 2 or 3 moments, and then he is at once engaged in the torturous punishment which he is destined to suffer. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada. 1 yojana is calculated to be 8 miles, and he has to pass along a road which is therefore as much as 792,000 miles. Such a distance is passed over within a few moments only. The subtle body is covered by the constables so that the living entity can pass such a long distance quickly and at the same time tolerate the suffering. This covering, although material, is of such fine elements that material scientists cannot discover what the covering are made of. To pass 792,000 miles within a few moments seems wonderful to the modern space travelers. They have so far traveled at a speed of 18,000 miles per hour. But here we see that a criminal passes 792,000 miles within a few moments, within a few seconds only, although the process is not spiritual but material. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport.
Kapila Deva explaining to his mother the adverse and how the living entity has to, activities in a subtle body, their reactions, has to experience hunger, thirst, and in today's fire around him, verses we are seeing how the living entity after death, hot sand, he is being taken to the without water or shelter Yamasadanam nearby. Sometimes under such conditions he may fall presence of Yamaraj on the ground. And how the living entity has to, in a subtle body, has to experience hunger, thirst, forest fire around him, and hot sand, being whipped without water or shelter anywhere nearby. Sometimes under such conditions he may fall unconscious on the ground, but he is again asked to rise up and he is asked to quickly move on that path. That path is 99,000 yojanas, which is 792,000 miles. And he is asked to traverse within a few moments. And then he is engaged in yama sadhana, in varieties of punishments, yatanaha. So this is the description in the Bhagavatam of what awaits a sinful conditioned soul, how he has to go through this kind of an experience after death, before he is awarded another body, before he gets another opportunity in some part of the material universe. So these descriptions are indeed quite scary. What the living entity has to go through. But this is the description given in the Bhagavatam by Kapila himself. We must have faith in the words of the Bhagavatam. These are spoken by great devotees, Lord's incarnations, and all the acharyas have accepted these statements as it is. So in a sense, this is the situation in the material world for the living entity is very, very torturous. While living also he has to experience different kinds of difficulties. And even after death, he has to experience. So what is the hope? Srimad Bhagavatam, when the sages of Naimisharanya were asking questions to Sutta Goswami, they mention in 3 verses very 3 important factors, which is actually a great hope for all of us. So the 3 verses are, I'll read one by one and slightly read Prabhupada's explanations also. The sages have already asked 2 questions, and before they ask the 3rd question, they begin to talk about 3 important, very, very merciful manifestations of the Lord in the material world, and how a conditioned soul can take advantage. The first of the 3 verses is this: Apannaha samsritim ghoram yannama vivasho grunan tatho sadhyo vimuccheta yad bhibheti swayam bhayam. Bhagavatam in the very first chapter propounds this principle about the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. So here in this verse it is said, Apanna samsritim ghoram. Ghora, complicated, fearful, dreadful. Apanna samsritim. Samsritim is repeated cycle of birth and death. So here we are seeing that how a soul passes through the different kinds of experiences after death. And this is not once, he has to go through that again and again. Apannaha samsritim ghoram. Apannaha means entanglement in this samsritim ghoram samskritim apannaha. As devotees, we must reflect on this. Actually, it is a very, very miserable state for the living entity. Unless we develop this understanding and develop a sense of detachment, about this material world. If a devotee has a very pessimistic attitude towards the material world, material success, material pleasures, material comforts, and that kind of attitude is very essential for spiritual life. Not that material life is wonderful. Maybe in India we have some difficulties, but we can improve, and the material world is a wonderful place. A devotee never has that kind of a perspective. He is very pessimistic about material existence. Apanna samsrutim ghoram. To experience repeatedly birth and death. And birth and death itself is so miserable. And then after death, to go through all these kind of experiences again and again, it is ghoram. But the hope is apanna samsrutim ghoram yannama vivasho grunan tatho sadhyo vimuccheta yad bibheti swayam bhayam. But the Lord's holy name, if we can chant, and in this particular verse the sages are mentioning, Vivasho grunan. Grunan is to chant. Vivasho grunan means even if one chants inattentively, unconsciously, not very carefully. Later on, an example of an unconscious, inattentive chanting, the example is given in the Bhagavatam of Ajamila. He chanted Narayana's name addressing his son, but he was saved. So here, Yannama vivasho gruna, vivashaha. Vashaha means rapt attention. Vivashaha means vigatha. Vashaha. Without rapt attention, unconsciously. Tatho sadhyo vimuccheta. One is immediately freed from apanna samshrutim ghoram. Because yad bibheti swayam bhayam. Even fear personified is fearful of the Lord's holy name. Living beings who are entangled, apannaha, in the complicated meshes, ghoram, of birth and death, can be freed immediately, sadhyo vimuccheta, by even unconsciously chanting the holy name of Krishna. Yannama vivasho grunan, which is feared by fear personified. Yad bibheti swayam bhayam. So, we can see how important chanting of the holy name of Krishna is. In fact, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is further developed. Saving one from material existence is actually not the main impact, main result of the holy name. The main characteristic of the holy name is the holy name can awaken love of God. That is the much superior effect of the holy name than even apanna samshrutim ghoram yannama vivasho grunan. This vivasho grunan can save you from apanna samshrutim ghoram. What to speak of respectful, attentive, offenseless chanting that can awaken love of God in the heart of a living entity. There was once an occasion when Srila Prabhupada was, the devotees were trying to set up a temple in London, and Srila Prabhupada had come to London, and at that time the Beatles had given an estate of theirs for devotees to stay. And Srila Prabhupada was also staying there with a few devotees while the temple was getting ready in London city. This estate was on the suburbs of London. And in that, they stayed there for a few weeks. And at that time, Prabhupada used to take morning walk with the devotees around that estate. And there was a gardener, about 70 years age, elderly man, about Prabhupada's age. And so whenever they would go for a morning walk, other times Prabhupada would meet him and greet him. And he was also very respectful to Srila Prabhupada, elderly man. And he also lived in the same premises in another house, another wooden house, with his wife, elderly woman. And devotees became friendly with this gardener and his wife. One of the days, the wife of the gardener shared with the devotees that they had a great concern that they would lose their job. So the devotees asked, why? What is wrong? What is happening? And so the wife of the elderly gardener confided with one of the devotees, and she said, my husband is an elderly man, and all night he is very disturbed. Not only he, even I am very disturbed in the night. Because in the house where we stay, we hear some strange, fearful noises all through the night. So the devotees were inquisitive and they asked, what kind of noise? And so the woman described that on the attic, we fear like heavy chains being dragged. And we feel like someone being dragged, someone with his boots being dragged. And we wake up and we are full of fear. And looks like there is a ghost in the house. So the devotees heard that and then they said, did you call an exorcist to do something? And they said, yes, we engaged an exorcist. And still nothing happened. And because of this, we stay awake. And my husband stays awake. And during daytime, he feels very tired and sleepy. And he's not able to do his job well. And his master is already noticing that. And so he's likely to lose the job. We don't know what is going to happen. No, elderly people. That job was important. And this kind of a difficulty they were going through. So the devotees discussed among themselves. And then they were all young devotees, Westerners. And they're just hearing about Krishna consciousness. And then said, I've heard Srila Prabhupada says that yes, there is ghosts are there. Even in the Vedic literatures, there are descriptions of ghosts. And ghosts can become very fearful. And they talked about this. And then on one occasion, they mentioned this to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada, very confidently, he said, no, that ghosts can be driven away. So then devotees asked, what? Srila Prabhupada, how to drive them away? Prabhupada said, do kirtan all day and blow conch shell and sprinkle water offered to Krishna. So the devotees heard all this and then they said, okay. And then according to one narration of the story, Prabhupada also joined the devotees and they did kirtan for some time. And then Prabhupada left and then the devotees continued doing loud chanting, singing, dancing, going from room to room for 5 hours. And then after 5 hours, they came out and they told the gardener and his wife, now you can go. Everything will be okay. Devotees were also confident because Prabhupada has said that. And then they came away. And that night, the gardener and the elderly wife, husband and wife, they slept. And next morning they came and said, there was no disturbance at all. And they had a peaceful sleep. So, as this verse is describing, Yad bibheti swayam bhayam. Even fear personified is afraid of the holy name. What to speak of the ghosts and such creatures. So the holy name of Krishna, even unconsciously chanting, can save from apanna samsritim ghoram. So on the one hand, we hear from the Bhagavatam these kind of descriptions. The conditioned soul, a sinful living entity, has to go through. And we are all born in Kali Yuga itself is an indication that we have a big account of sins and what is awaiting us. The great hope is the holy name. And the second thing the Bhagavatam mentions, the sages of Naimisharanya, the second point that they are mentioning is Yatpada samshraya suta munayaha prashamayanaha sadhya punanti upasprushtaha svardhunyaponu sevaya. The second point that the sages of Naimisharanya are mentioning about Svardhunyapa anusevaya. Svardhuni refers to Ganga. Svardhuni apaha means the waters of Ganges. Svardhunapaha anusevaya. If one takes bath in the Ganges over many times, then one becomes cleansed of sinful reactions. That's why people go to Ganga, people go to Prayag, take bath in the Sangam like many devotees have been doing. We have been participating in the Kumbh Mela. So, but then the Bhagavatam gives an alternative. Yatpada samshraya sutha munaya prashamayanaha sadhya punanti upasprushtaha svardhunyaponu sevaya. Ganges purifies after repeated taking bath, repeatedly. But if we come in touch with a pure devotee who is yatpada samshrayaha, who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, prashamayanaha, and who is fully absorbed in thought of Krishna. And if we take shelter, and if we take his association, upasprushtaha, come in touch with him. If we come in touch with a pure devotee who is absorbed in Krishna, who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, then immediately one gets purified. Sadhya punanti upasprushtaha svardhunyaponu sevaya. O Suta, those great sages who have completely taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, yatpada samshraya sutha, can at once sanctify those who come in touch with them, at once sanctify. Sadhya punanti, who come in touch with them, upasprushtaha. Whereas the waters of the Ganges, svardhunyapaha, can sanctify only after prolonged use. Anusevaya svardhunyapaha. So in other words, to come in touch with a pure devotee of Krishna, who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, and who is absorbed in the Lord, one can become very quickly purified. In fact, this is like many of us have been to Kumbh Mela, or if you also would have gone. We saw so many sadhus there. But, of course, Prabhupada said that we don't criticize the sadhus and the yogis who come there. But the sadhu who is taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord and who is completely absorbed in thoughts of the Lord, that quality of a sadhu is a very, very rare occurrence. Krishna explains in the Gita, Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashritaha Bahavaho Jnana Tapasa Putha Madbhavamagataha. There is one expression in this verse, Krishna's statement, Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashritaha. Manmaya means Matmaya, means fully absorbed in me. Actually, this is Krishna's message in the Gita, to be fully absorbed in the Lord. Actually, very few people have taken these instructions seriously. People may be reading Gita, Mamupashrayaha, Manmayaha, Matmaya, Manmaya, being absorbed in Krishna. They are the very elevated souls, and they are very rare. And such a soul, if we come in touch with, Upasprushtaha Sadhya Punanti, one can very quickly get purified. So, we are very fortunate that we have come in touch with Srila Prabhupada, who is such a pure devotee, taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, and who is absorbed in thoughts of the Lord, serving the Lord. So if you notice here, the Bhagavatam is pointing out, if you want to be quickly purified of your sinful reactions, the Shastra is not, Bhagavatam is not saying, take shelter of the Lord, but take shelter of the devotee of the Lord who is absorbed in thoughts of the Lord. That's very important. So to take shelter of a pure devotee of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada was actually such a great devotee who also had taken shelter of his guru and the acharyas. There was one occasion a devotee recalls. Devotees were going on a morning walk, and the devotee mentioned to Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Thakur is my second favorite author. Meaning, he was implying, Prabhupada, you are my favorite author. He was a Western devotee. And he was reading Prabhupada's books. And Prabhupada understood that. He was saying that Bhaktivedanta Thakur is his second favorite author. Second most favorite author. Implying Prabhupada is his first most favorite author. And Prabhupada was silent for a moment, and then he said, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, very great Acharya. If I have a small percentage of his devotion to Krishna, how wonderful that would be. And as Srila Prabhupada recollected about Bhaktivedanta Thakur and his devotion to Krishna, his voice choked and there were tears in his eyes. We see how Srila Prabhupada was so devoted to the acharyas. Just a little mention, a little trigger would choke his voice. He was so devoted. He loved his spiritual master. He loved the previous acharyas. Very, very special. Just a mention in the morning walk and talk about Bhaktivedanta Thakur, his voice chokes. Because this devotee appreciated Bhaktivedanta Thakur. And then he is reflecting, so devoted. So actually it is a fact, all these acharyas, they are very special, and to take shelter of them, sadhya punanti upasprushtaha. That's the great opportunity that we have. So this was the second thing the sages of Naimisharanya are mentioning. The first was the holy name. The second is taking shelter of pure devotees who are absorbed in thoughts of the Lord. And the third one, in this verse, the sages mention, Kova bhagavatastasya punya shlokedya karmanaha shuddhi kamo na shrunuyad yashah kalimalapaham. Punya shlokedya karmanaha. Punya shloka, Krishna's another name, one who is described by virtuous poetry. Punya shlokedya, idya refers to worship. One who is worshipped by chosen poetry, the Lord who is whose virtues are described in shlokas, and his karmanaha, his activities, and yashasaha, and his yashaha, and his glories, the glorious yashaha karmanaha, the glorious activities of the Lord. Shrunuyad, hearing about the glorious activities of the Lord. This is the third important principle. So, the sages are saying, Kova bhagavatastasya punya shlokedya karmanaha shuddhi kamo. One who is desiring shuddhi kama, one who is desiring purification of his heart. Who is that person who is unwilling to hear the glorious pastimes of the Lord? In other words, hearing the glorious pastimes of the Lord purifies one's consciousness. So, who is there? Kova bhagavatastasya. Kaha va bhagavatastasya. Who is there? Desiring deliverance from the vices of the age of quarrel. Kalimalapaham. In Kali Yuga, Mala Apaham. The vices of Kali Yuga. Who desiring deliverance, Shuddhi Kamaha. Kalimalapaham, Shuddhi Kamaha. Desiring deliverance from the vices of the age of quarrel, who is not willing to hear the virtuous glories of the Lord, glorious deeds of the Lord. So, Srila Prabhupada has given us the Bhagavatam, which is full of the activities of the Lord's wonderful avatars, wonderful pastimes. And Srila Prabhupada also has given us the Krishna book, which is full of pastimes of the Lord as described in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. In fact, Srila Prabhupada himself would relish reading Krishna book many, many times. When Prabhupada was in Los Angeles, there was a garden. Every afternoon he would come and sit there, and the devotees would gather, and a few devotees would take turn and they would read Krishna book. Prabhupada would just be sitting with his eyes half closed and nodding. 1 hour, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. Devotees would go on and on and on. Prabhupada, now and then he would interrupt and he would speak a little bit, but by and large again he would continue hearing. Prabhupada loved to hear Krishna book, reading of Krishna book. Even in Vrindavan, Prabhupada would sit in the garden and devotees would read Krishna book. And Prabhupada loved hearing Krishna's pastimes. And Prabhupada set an example for us too. So, these three principles, these three great blessings of the Lord for Kali Yuga, the holy name of the Lord, the presence and coming in touch with the pure devotee of the Lord, and hearing the glorious pastimes of the Lord. Punya shloketya karmanaha, to hear the glories of the Lord from the Bhagavatam, from Krishna book. And how wonderful our life can be. Actually, Srila Prabhupada has given us a lifestyle, a pattern, how we can lead our lives. Our lives can be absorbed in these three spiritual treasures that Prabhupada has made available. Chanting the holy names of the Lord, spreading the chanting of the holy name, taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada, serving his mission, hearing from the Bhagavatam, distributing this literature to others. A whole life can be just revolving around these wonderful spiritual treasures. And this is the hope for all of us. This is the greatest hope. We can have a life filled with these things, and then we don't have to fear all these things that Kapila Muni is describing about what happens to a conditioned soul who is absorbed in karma of this material world after his death, what he has to go through. We'll stop here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.